Welcome back to AI Snacks with Rom and Robbie, an AI literacy podcast. I'm your host, Anastasia, and this is part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Vivienne Ming. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, pause, go back, and listen. Seriously, Vivienne took us through how AI actually works, what it gets spectacularly right, what it gets quietly wrong, and why we need to stop believing that better punctuation means better thinking. And here's where things get really interesting. Because around the 45-minute mark of our conversation, we made a turn, a very human turn. I told Vivienne about my daughter. She's 17, she's a pianist. By the way, this little Gershwin you are hearing as an initiation of this podcast is played by her, and she recorded Gershwin when she was 12 years old. And my daughter plays piano competitions and wins them, but she wants to become a medical doctor. And she is, I believe, what Vivienne would call robot-proof. She questions AI, she uses it, she's not afraid of it, but she's not governed by it. And that story opened a door into what is really the heart of Vivienne's work. How do we actually build better humans? Not better users, not better prompters, better humans with curiosity that didn't get trained out of them, with intellectual humility that doesn't collapse under social pressure, with the perspective-taking ability that actually makes you effective with AI and with other human beings. And from there, we went into leadership, real leadership, not the kind of HR slides and LinkedIn posts about growth mindset, the messy, uncertain, risk-embracing kind that Vivienne argues is the only kind that will still matter when the machine has all the answers. This is a conversation about being human in the age of intelligent machines. And I think it might be the most important thing we've recorded on this podcast. So let's go. And this brings me actually to the second part of this conversation. How do we educate and raise better humans? I have a daughter, she's 17, and I stepped down from a huge corporate position when she was 3 years old because she started singing from symphonies. And it was before hybrid workspace, was before, all those live conversation on Zoom. It was 2013, and I had to train her in music. She's now a pianist. She wins competitions, but she will be trained as a medical doctor because she loves science. And she loves books and arts. And she's very, very unique for me. I think I kind of robot-proofed her. She's very critical towards the machines, but she uses them and she's fighting for, dear teachers, let's talk about AI in school because please educate us how to use AI responsibly, whatever it means. What does it mean to use AI responsibly outside of cheating?
Yeah. And I don't think anyone has good answers to that right now.
Absolutely no. I have my take, what it means for my company. It's like a manifesto. It does not mean I solved the issue and cracked the nut. But how do we really prepare humans to be hybrid or enhanced or even unpair with those AIs? And my huge concern is I'm kind of under the impression that you have humans who are skilled, who are sophisticated, and they will benefit tremendously. And then we have obviously some situations where we simply do not know how to do things. So if I am to repair my dishwasher, I will YouTube it and show me what to do. I don't need now to call for an electrician. And this is how I would use now digital technologies to help me with my problem solving in an area I know nothing about. But this is something very primitive. This is not like a top problem solving. It will not change the world. It would not even change my life. Maybe a couple of evenings at home. I wonder, how do we make sure that this sugar component in AI getting addicted, outsourcing, and just using it without a second thought, how do we prevent humans to become less sophisticated, less into innovation, problem-solving capabilities? How do we make them more instead of reducing them to just serving those machines?
Let's talk about this at a couple of different levels. So I noted earlier that I ran this experiment. And believe it or not, the press got ahead of the paper. So the paper hasn't been released yet, but I had a Wall Street Journal article about it and a variety of other sources. So you can actually go read about it, even though we haven't fully released the results yet. And again, we had people make predictions about the future, which, by the way, if you take some very smart UC Berkeley students that have no special expertise in a question, they're terrible at this. I mean, why would they be any good at knowing what the price of oil will be in 6 months? So that was a really challenging task for humans to do, even smart humans. And then we had some small open source models and some large state-of-the-art models. At the time, Gemini 3 from Google was the state of the art. So it did the best. It was the best on traditional benchmarks. It did the best in its predictions. Its predictions were essentially, what does historical data say? And it really wasn't bad. It wasn't as good as, let's say, Polymarket. So this is a prediction market. It's where I took the questions from. And the reason I did that is because then I would know what the answers were. Because at some point, Polymarket would say, yes, the price of oil is over this or under that. And we could look at all the way people had bet, literal money at the time, the literal day we ran the experiment. So how did our humans and our AIs compare to the notional experts spending real money, betting real money on Polymarket, which is to say they both did worse than Polymarket, and the humans did much worse than Polymarket. But of course, the thing I'm interested in is, what did they do together? So then we had humans and machines making predictions together. And this is where your story comes in, because there isn't one story, which is to say the vast majority either simply asked the AI for an answer and submitted it, or they gave AI an answer and asked it to tell them why they were right. So like the classic thing you're not supposed to do in science. And needless to say, I mean, one of those groups, they didn't do any worse than AI, but they also were, the humans in that context were completely superfluous. And the other group actually did worse. So they used AI, but they performed worse than AI would have performed all by itself. So when you worry about like this human contribution, or how are humans using AIs, not only are these groups underperforming in one way or another, when we actually look at the cognitive activity, particularly of that first group, we called them the automators, it drops. Compared to when they were making decisions on their own, what we measured was gamma activity. This has gotten some controversy, I think largely by people that don't want to think that there's something wrong with AI, possibly because they've invested in it. But you know, as gamma goes up and down, it predicts a lot of things about people's long-term life outcomes. Cognitive decline, even gamma levels in infants predicts things like lifetime earnings. So it's a messy space to be researching, but this is the single best metric we could have looked at. And we only did it in a few of our participants, but we could see a dramatic drop. Like they were working hard versus they were watching TV. Now we not only have the fact that 90% of the participants in my experiment gained no benefit from using AI, there was evidence that they were kind of shutting their brains off. And while agentic AI hasn't been long enough for neuroscientists to track its impacts, a very closely related AI technology has been. One of the few true everyday AI-enabled technologies that has ever existed, which is automated navigation, using Google Maps or Apple Maps or what have you to get around. And the research is telling a pretty compelling story that people that over-rely on these navigation tools are showing memory declines and cognitive declines, accelerated. Because we've known really for generations now, active use of cognition, both earlier and later in life, pushes back the start of what's called senescence, the sort of point at which we begin to really collapse into old age. One of the most predictive things is navigating through space, and we don't have to do it anymore. Some people use it only a little, some use it a lot. We almost certainly will see a divergence there based on that usage profile. So my prediction that we'll see a similar divergence with agentic AI. Well, some people will just use it to get the answers and stop really thinking, and therefore stop engaging this complex prefrontal entorhinal cognitive system, this very model-based system. Then it's not a huge stretch at all to get worried about that and worried about the implications. Then we have my cyborgs in my experiment. A name I didn't come up with, but being a sci-fi nerd, I love using it, was actually came up with by that Harvard group that did the BCG research. The cyborgs, when you looked at their behavior, when they were using an LM, even a small open source model, you couldn't tell who made the decision because the choices that they made, the predictions that they made, were different than what either the human or the AI would have made alone. And the predictions they were made were better than the best humans. They were better than the best AIs. They were as good, but in different ways than Polymarket itself. A group of humans, smart kids with no expertise, making 10 predictions in 1 hour were as good as experts with millions of dollars bet on the question. That is, to me, an incredibly positive story. So that's just level setting for everything you were just talking about. And I know you want to jump in here. The next thing we should talk about is, what do we do about it? So I've described the behavioral difference between the group. And one last comment on that. When I look at my cyborgs and when I look at my own usage of agentic AI systems, what my metaphor that I use, maybe stronger than a metaphor, is it's like working with one of my brilliant graduate students. And again, as I said earlier, I alluded to, my graduate students know everything, understand nothing. I'm not there to teach them knowledge. They're already geniuses. They already have degrees in neuroscience or machine learning or psychology. I'm not there to teach them facts. They could go learn them on their own. And we all live in the same modern world. They could look it up on their phone if they wanted to. I am there to teach them what to do when there are no more facts and there are no more answers and we don't even know what the next question is. And when I work with them, because they are so smart, one of my big jobs is when I listen to them, give me an answer. Here's what I did. Here's what the results are. I'm listening not for whether they're wrong, but whether we understood each other. Did you really answer the question that I suggested for you to explore? Am I understanding what you're saying? Are you understanding what I'm saying? So much is hidden underneath there. And so that goal, I'm only a good research mentor because I am an expert and I know facts, even though that's not what I'm teaching them. Same thing with working with AI, that I truly know the things I'm exploring, even if it, in a sense, knows it better or explores better, but I need to know. I need to know why, not how. It can do the how for me, but why do I need to do this? And that requires a real depth of understanding. And I see some of that emerge in my cyborgs, because what is predictive of hybrid intelligence in my task? As I already said earlier, it's not the AI benchmarks, because the cyborgs using an open source model did almost as well as the ones using a bleeding edge state-of-the-art model. What really predicted was fluid intelligence, curiosity. If the AI gave you a good enough answer, did you keep looking? And intellectual humility. If the AI told you were wrong, did you either ignore it or did you just say, I give up, I do whatever you say? Or did you take the feedback and update your beliefs and keep going? And then lastly, perspective taking. It turns out theory of mind, your ability to understand other people, kind of what I was talking about with my graduate students. Perspective taking predicts success with AI. All right, so that's the behaviors. Now we have two levers that we can talk about. What do we change about AI to increase hybrid intelligence? And even more importantly to me, but maybe they're about equal, truly, what do we change about people? How do we get more cyborgs? Because AI is simply exposing a thing which has always been true. Our traditional education system, which is what we still do, is all about memorizing a whole bunch of answers to well-posed problems or how to get an answer, the algorithm, the equation. And frankly, that's just not terribly economically valuable anymore. But the thing is, amazing lives have always been predicted by your ability to explore ill-posed problems rather than your ability to answer well-posed ones. It's just now AI is a forcing function. There's nothing left.
I wonder about two things. So AI actually emerged in the 40s, and that was a period in human history of huge suffering, scarcity, and this period gave us so much science, von Neumann, Turing, brilliant minds operating under constraints, human neglect. Just, personal story. If we go into Turing's story, it's really heartbreaking. When I talk today to some brilliant AI researchers, they are quite often referring, it helped a lot that I started in Fortran and not, what we have now. It gave me an edge to really think before I start coding and doing stuff with the machine. I'm wondering, can we kind of explore whether the environment of scarcity in resources and not abundance posing between just, this actionism would create a good environment to become a better cyborg. And another thing is, I am very much for fusing humanities and STEMs, and I'm kind of always theory of mind and computation. This is kind of difficult, but for example, literature, this is the enormous source to study theory of minds because all those novels, it opens up huge books on why this guy did that. Completely counterintuitive. Was he crazy? And why she behaved like this and that. It's actually a window, and of course, AI can't read it the way we read it. It can't learn from those things in the way we learn because the mechanics might be there. Weights, statistical processing, some memory lakes, some generalization, but it does not have the chemistry. It does not operate with all the hormones symphony in the human brains, which makes us not just perceive and kind of, operate with facts and numbers, but feel, giving this perspective. And I'm just wondering, how do we take those learnings from the past and come to today and create a system which makes better humans?
I am a computational neuroscientist, which on some level means that building an intelligence like us is theoretically possible. But you're right, our intelligence is so much more messy and complex than remotely anything that exists in the sort of digital world. And nor do I think something magical happens when you enter a world like quantum into this. Although, hey, the ability of a quantum computer to represent a full distribution rather than just maximum likelihood for the computational nerds in the room enters up new areas of modeling possibility. But again, it's not
And
magic.
multiverse
I'm
theory.
sure.
Welcome.
But really, this interesting thing emerged when you can do the full like the full Bayesian computation, which is much more like what our brains do, but in wildly different ways, again, than a quantum computer would do. So capturing all of that, just even adding the vagus nerve, this thing that's carrying information, you have more cells down in your enteric nervous system, down in your guts, than you have you have to cut off the cerebellum, but in the rest of your brain, there's a lot of computation going on that we currently are leaving out. We're simulating all of human intelligence as being something vaguely pyramidal, celly, and cortical. And even then, by approximation, because we're surely not capturing all of the complex computation being done, even down at the vesicular level. Okay, that's just pure neuroscience, nerd talk. So for me, thinking about these two big levers that we have, the human and the machine. Let me start with the machine because I think there's an easier story here, but one that's less over the control of us every day. So my kids are of a similar age to yours. And even as an AI kind of person, there's only so much I can do about the models they make use of. So the control I have through them is really, do I build a person that, if I can borrow my own language, engages with AI like a cyborg? Because I think the wrong story here is AI is a vice. Like, don't drink too much, don't smoke, get off of social media or take breaks from it. No, now we're posing AI as a bad thing. And if you use it, you're doing a bad thing. And when you're using it, it's porn and it's fun and whatever it is you're wasting time with. What we have to do is engage kids, not just teach them, because this isn't about memorizing a bunch of facts. This is experiential learning. It's deeply developmental. What were the predictive factors I listed? Curiosity. You can't give someone a lecture about curiosity. I do, in fact, believe you could have a course about curiosity, but what that course is going to be is rewarding interesting questions instead of right answers. That course is going to be about thinking of the reinforcement learning system instantiated in the human brain and thinking, is this person getting dopaminergic rewards for wrong answers? Because now suddenly they've discovered they don't understand something, and that's a positive because now they can explore. This is actually a lesson my son, as I wrote about in the book and have spoken about before, my son has type 1 diabetes. There's this really important lesson in the diabetes world, which is there are no bad numbers.
Mhm.
Wow, your blood sugar is really high. The worst next words out of your mouth could, what did you do that was wrong? Because then they start hiding it. If instead you say, I'm so glad we checked because now we can do something about it. Now you've completely reframed that problem as knowledge is positive. And this is an area of behavioral economics and behavioral sciences research. Why don't people go see the doctor? It's often called belief-based utility, and it's wildly irrational. Knowing or not knowing doesn't change whether you have cancer. Knowing is, if you're a perfectly rational agent, knowing is always better. And yet people don't go. I worked on a project, an AI kind of project. We were trying to understand why people don't show up for fully insurance covered kidney dialysis. If you don't go, you die, or you literally knock years off of your life. And there's no financial reason not to go. So why aren't you? And yet, shockingly, large numbers of people regularly miss dialysis, which is insane. If you thought humans were perfectly rational, or if you thought the nature of human judgment was this local decision and nothing else, and you're not accounting for stress and anxiety, you're not accounting for senses of locus of control, will knowing change anything? Or, if you're an American, maybe I can't afford for this medical treatment, so I'd rather be happily and ignorant right now than know the truth and have nothing I can do about it. So you end up with these perverse behaviors because humans are irrational. I want to raise a generation of kids that are cyborgs, that are curious, that have learned the lesson that it's always better to know, to look for the better answer. Genuinely, not as almost a kind of self-punishment, but because they truly engages them to explore those mysteries and voice what they truly see as different. Like, even if I'm wrong, what I'm uniquely saying is my value, because the boring right answer is free in everybody's pocket. And so that was curiosity. Intellectual humility. Stop worrying about whether you're wrong. My wife and I ran a research project in which we analyzed 60,000 university and MBA students and found one of the biggest telling differences between the very best students and the next group just below them is the very best students were regularly wrong. They intentionally exposed their misunderstandings because it enhanced their learning. They were fine with being wrong. They weren't hung up about it. Even though they were the smartest kids in class, arguably, they were okay being wrong. And the vast majority of even successful students hid their misunderstandings from their peers, I would argue from themselves, given a larger body of research. One of the benefits of AI is it can tell you you're wrong without you having to have that sort of social pressure. I don't want to look dumb in front of other human beings. Well, guess what? AI doesn't care. So what a great platform for saying, here's what I believe. Tell me why I'm wrong. I talked about perspective taking. Again, we could 100% have classes on perspective taking. Are fluid intelligence, perspective taking, and curiosity, do they have genetic components? Absolutely. There are clear, strong genetic correlates here that predict a lot of the variation in people. It's useful to understand that because it tells us something about where you're starting from and what kind of interventions will be successful. Everything I'm going through right now is what our schools should be about today. And the nice thing is, you can still learn how to factorize a polynomial. You can still go read literature yourself, but you can multiplex that with courses so that can be about curiosity building explicitly. It can be about fluid intelligence development, at least in young kids. It can be about resilience, another construct that didn't come up in my experiment, but I describe in detail in my book. These things are hugely predictive of longevity, of lifetime earnings, of happiness and friendship networks. Why don't we teach these? And I know why we don't, because they're hard to measure. And again, you can't just give a lecture on it. It has to be engineered. You have to create experiences that develop these qualities in kids. By the way, 100% develop these qualities in adults. It's a lot harder, but we could do this in our companies for our employees, create amazing experiences to develop curiosity. But we don't, because management is all about reducing uncertainty rather than exploring it. And in a world in which this silly little device has all the right answers, exploration is the unique human value add. So that's the human side of the equation. We can talk about the AI side. How do we develop cyborgs from an AI and a machine learning perspective? But that's what we're missing formally in human experience. And without it, wow, I'm really concerned. Not because all the jobs will disappear, not because, in fact, I agree with everyone else that sort of nerd and labor economics, there will be more jobs.
Yeah.
Most of those jobs will be terrible, deprofessionalized jobs that most people won't want to do. And the jobs people will really treasure and wish they could do will simply be above their human capital level. And it doesn't have to be that way. That's not a prediction. It's just a direction that we're heading. We could pull so many more people across this divide, and we're not. That's what worries me. Not that it's inevitable, but that we aren't bothering.
Which is actually about human leadership. And leadership is ultimately about decision making and actually bringing others along on a journey where the journey is treasured and not just some result which might not be, let's say, a final one and just maybe an intermediate one, or even the result wouldn't matter. I'm wondering, what do you think about the current state of leadership in startups versus leadership in large companies? Leadership is as much misused and inflated word as AI. Everyone is talking about it, but then you look what is happening inside of HR organizations, and I see tons of slides, but not really a lot of substance. So what is your take on what is going on? Why is it the urge to control, to wear a white coat, but not really kind of, to get messy and hands dirty and try because it might be a failure? So what is your take, and what would be your recommendations? And probably I'm asking too much, but still.
So, although I'm not describing any individual human, management is profoundly risk averse. And this doesn't change. Anyone who thinks venture capital is risk capital, no, their whole job is within this portfolio space, find the least risky bets. It's why all of them want to pile on in Series Triple Z on some $1 trillion companies, because it's a sure thing. In fact, that's what the very first VC I ever spoke with, not I ever pitched, but the very first one I ever spoke with said that her job was to find me after I don't need her anymore, but before I've realized it, which I've always remembered. So this seems silly, but there was this absurd US sitcom series set in a cartoonish evil corporation, and specifically in the research lab within that corporation. It was called Better Off Ted. And in one episode, this character who's sort of a hapless junior executive has this cool idea for a light bulb. I don't even remember what made it cool, but everybody loved it. And the whole episode, she's moving up the ranks. Everyone's behind her. This is going to be groundbreaking revolution. And, obviously the intention here is it's very farcical and cartoonish. So everyone's absurd. And right near the end of the episode, everyone's saying, this is amazing. They're drinking champagne. The launch tomorrow is going to be the biggest ever. And she sort of offhandedly says, yeah, this is almost certain to be a huge success. And suddenly everyone stops talking. And they said, almost? Do you know something we don't know? Why isn't it going to be a definite success? And the whole thing in like 30 seconds, it all falls apart. The whole project gets canned and suddenly she's back where she started. Boy, I've watched that show, even though it ran for a very short period of time, so many times because stuff like that literally happens. It's like the show Silicon Valley. Yes, it's silly and it's farcical. I know those people. I didn't enjoy it because it was so real. And I'm saying this as someone who's actually from Silicon Valley. I love the spirit of the San Francisco Bay Area, that sort of hippie meets intellectual kind of thing here in Berkeley and Palo Alto. But once it became the domain of a bunch of Stanford and Harvard MBAs, it really changed. When I heard people say, I did this interview series with NPR, a radio station here long ago, and they were interviewing us about what had changed in Silicon Valley. And I'd hear these people saying, God, when I showed up in 2012, it was the Burning Man was, and I felt like I was listening to Locust talk about when I showed up in this region of, Eastern Nigeria, there was grain everywhere. And now it's all gone. This place has lost its, you did this. You people came here to become billionaires. You told yourself you were here to change the world for the better, but you didn't actually care about any of that. And that real divergence, that I think the true self-belief that the tech industry was here to do good, and some were, but the actual underlying instinct was, I want to be like Sun Microsystems and Silicon Graphics and Microsoft to pull Seattle into this and Google. And what they really mean is I want to be a billionaire. Things around here really started to change. I think that spirit is still part of Silicon Valley. It's just had a really rough time because people who fundamentally didn't want to explore the unknown. They wanted a sure thing that made them a pseudo celebrity and allowed them to buy a yacht. That really took over not just Silicon Valley, but tech worldwide. And that kind of genuinely breaks my heart as someone who has started companies to solve a problem. And you realize to so many of the business leaders here, problems are entirely interchangeable. It's only whether they make money that makes them valuable. And I know there's a lot of libertarian economists that would argue that that's a moral truth, but they're wrong. A lot of problems don't make money. One of the projects I'm most proud of ever having worked on was a facial analysis system. And I mean, facial recognition is the villain story in AI for good world. We got to build a system to try and reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members. And it turns out orphan refugees are terrible customers. They never click on your ads. They don't buy anything. They don't care about knockoff Hermes bags. So their business model there is just a disaster. If only those orphans could figure out how to monetize their situation, then I'd be happy to help them. Like, that's kind of, it sounds farcical. And yet some of that is really there in business leadership in the tech industry, as opposed to I can help. And so I have to help, because there is no experience on earth that is worse than being an orphan refugee in a war zone or even outside of a war zone. So this is what you do because you can, not because it's monetizable. And maybe as you're researching postpartum depression, you find something there, like a blood test that you can't give away for free, and you can build a business around that. But that's never the reason I get started in a problem. So I know I've shifted this from management to me, but let me put it in more meaningful terms. If you are a risk-averse manager and you just want to take your answers out of a super intelligent machine, just keep in mind, all of those same answers are in the hands of all of your competitors. Your competitors inside the company that are looking for your promotion, and your competitors across your market. And honestly, in the world today, your market is every market, because your biggest competitor is the tech company that's selling you your AI. So if you're not differentiating on something other than AI, then you will eventually disappear. It's just that simple. And you've only got a few different domains in which you can differentiate. One is create these sort of data modes, proprietary data sets no one else has, turn your AI to that. I virtually guarantee you will not win that fight, but that's one choice you could make. But another is to invest in your human capital. And if all the right answers are free in your pocket, the whole reason you're investing in human capital is not for the right answers, but for the exploration. And the overwhelming return on exploration is wrong answers. That sounds perverse. You should invest in wrong answers. But if those wrong answers are driven by curiosity, intellectual humility, fluid intelligence, resilience, perspective taking, empowered by AI, something truly superhuman and super AI emerges. The companies that figure that out, just like with humans, some companies are figuring that out. I don't know per se that startups or big mature multinationals have a profound advantage here. Startups have a nimbleness and a risk-philic advantage, but startups are also filled with idiots. I say that as someone who's built 13 companies. You're entering markets you don't understand. You're doing this with total stress because it's all money going out and no money coming in most of the time. So you make a lot of dumb decisions and you don't know what you're doing, whereas mature companies really have a lot of genuine expertise to deploy on markets and domains. They just deploy it scared, where startups can't afford to be scared, but they're dumb. Which of those is better at this moment in time? Neither. They're just different. So I think it's really a cultural question. Are you going to build a culture that is genuinely uncertainty-philic, that leans into the uncertain because that's where the unique value add is? And that sounds like a management consulting line, like, I'm a hard numbers neuroscientist. I'm happy to tell you literally equation-wise what uncertainty means to me. If you're not looking at that in terms of like our collective intelligence research, if you guys are not pushing through hurting factors that cause people to stop exploring and look at safe ideas, and we can quantify that in terms of the behavior of an employee base, then I hate to break it for you, you're not long for this world.
And Vivienne, how do you learn?
How do I learn?
Yes.
So I do a couple of different things. One is I read more research today than I ever read when I was a full-time academic scientist. Because when I was an academic scientist, I was reading the stuff about my work and neighboring fields. Now I read everything, even stuff, I will admit, that's a little outside. I was reading about some really interesting research on non-locality and like abstract math about non-locality and the implications of it. And I'm a pretty informed, non-expert in a lot of these related things, but that actually caused me to take a deep dive. So I'd stretched a little farther than I could understand in that paper. So I went in and I said, hey, Gemini, I am an expert in information theory and probability theory. This is talking about quantum information, and it's talking about von Neumann information as opposed to Shannon information.
Yeah.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, audience, that's fine. You're not a filthy, filthy nerd. That's not a knock on you. I didn't know what von Neumann information was. So I started walking through it, but I was looking for some direct parallels. I understand this. I don't understand this. Don't waste my time with metaphors. Walk me through the math, but start with what I do understand and draw. I really, for the first time, feel like I get quantum computing. I understand why it's powerful, but also why it's so difficult, and maybe why it isn't going to tick over and be the next big thing just because of those difficulties. But oh my goodness. And what's interesting is the math is only the starting point of the math. I don't mean the deep stuff. The starting point is only a step away from sort of traditional probability theory. It just basically it takes probability theory and puts it in the space of like imaginary numbers. And hey, turns out that gives you this really cool interaction term that makes everything hard and creates the world that we exist in. Wow, really cool. So that's how I learn. With one additional, hugely important, and I tell this to all of my students, if there is a stage and no one is on it, there had better be armed guards keeping you off. Because an open stage means you must be on it immediately giving a talk. I don't care if you've given this talk 1,000 times before. Better yet, give a talk about something you've never given a talk at before. Do improvisational lecture and say tax policy Moldova and give the best talk you can give off the top of your head. Interesting enough, this is what I do. I gave up preparing for talks 2 decades ago. People ask me to come. They tell me what the topic is they'd like me to cover. They tell me a little bit about the audience. My job, and I will admit, I think about it. As I'm sitting 15 minutes beforehand, I think about the audience and the topic and my work. And then I get up there and usually I say something foul-mouthed and a little bit funny because everyone has fallen asleep listening to other people drone on and on. And then I go. And maybe this isn't for everyone, but this is my point. It's for me. I give talks because I enjoy it and because my paid speaking actually funds my philanthropic research. Those are two great reasons. I really enjoy a stage, and the amount that a wealthy company will pay me to talk about my research to them, why would I say no? Someone gets to be alive because of that money. But the main reason I do it is if I've done that talk or my extemporaneous version of that talk a couple of times, I discover something. There's an old adage, you don't understand a topic until you've taught it for the 6th time. And it's really true. So,
Or wrote a book
like
about
I said,
it.
there you go. Perspective taking. There's a reason it is so predictive of both success with AI, but also of life outcomes, health, wealth, and happiness, because perspective taking forces you to confront your own misconcepts and your own biases. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the other person, but it means you have to understand yourself through their eyes. So immensely valuable. That's how I learn.
I can't thank you enough for your time. I wish you all imaginable happiness and those moments of magic on stage and with a book somewhere. And thank you so much for your work because it's truly amazing. And I learned so much. It was really inspiring, truly inspiring. Thank you for being an amazing human being.
That is very kind. I'm not good with compliments, but thank you very much.
Thank you. So here we are at the end of part 2. And I have to be honest, I've been sitting with this conversation for days now. And the thing that keeps coming back to me is something Vivienne said almost in passing. Exploration is the unique human value add. Not the answer, not the prompt, not the polished slide deck, or the beautifully formatted report, the willingness to go into the uncertain and not run away from it. And what she's really describing when she talks about cyborgs, about curiosity, about intellectual humility, she's describing leadership, real leadership, not the kind that comes in a 2-day offsite with a keynote speaker and a nice brochure, the kind that actually does something, moves something. Because here's what strikes me after this whole conversation. We are building the most powerful cognitive tools in human history, and we are using them to help us avoid thinking. We are spending billions to amplify our risk aversion. We are training an entire generation to ask machines for answers instead of asking themselves better questions. And that is not an AI problem, that's a human leadership problem. The organizations that will thrive in this era are not the ones with the best AI tools. They are the ones with the best humans. Humans who are genuinely curious. Humans who can see it with uncertainty and lean into it, enjoy it. Humans who have the intellectual humility to update their beliefs and the perspective to understand others deeply enough to collaborate with humans and with smart machines. And that means we have to take human development seriously, not as an HR line item, not as a leadership training module that everyone does before the annual review, but as a strategic priority, as the actual point of being in business in a world where the machine already has all the answers. And this is why I make this very podcast. This is why Vivienne writes books and gives talks and funds research she gives away for free. Because someone has to say the hard thing. The future doesn't need more efficient answer retrieval machines operating with a human attached. The future needs better humans. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time and your curiosity. which you clearly have because you made it to the end of a two-part, nearly 3 hours conversation about the nature of intelligence and the future of being human. That is in itself a very good sign. So hit subscribe, share this with someone who is a leader or wants to be one. And we will see you next week with a fresh new episode of AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie. Thank you.